stated by the international criminal tribunals. The Sri Lankan government used this practice extensively against Tamils, confiscating Tamils' private lands. In May 2013, 1,474 northern Tamils filed a petition against the government's confiscation of their land, stating that 6,381 acres were appropriated to build another army base in Jaffna. The majority of these individuals were refused permission to return to their lands and forced to remain in the welfare villages, which enabled the government to claim that the owners of these lands are unidentifiable. That's what they say. Even 5 years after the end of the war, Sri Lanka announced a defense budget of 1.95 billion pounds, or is it dollars? Dollars for 2014, 12% of the overall 2014 state budget. The Sri Lankan military's current reach includes police powers throughout the country with search and detention authority. In Tamil-speaking areas, the Sri Lankan military is increasing its economic role, controlling land and seemingly establishing itself as a permanent occupying presence. The heavy militarization of Northeast has led to the drastic increase in Sinhalese settlers, land grabs, construction of Buddhist temples, conversion of village names and street signs from Tamil to Sinhalese, and unrestricted Sinhalese enterprise, all of which threaten to permanently alter the local demography and exacerbate ethnic tensions, as noted by the International Crisis Group. Evidence related to the escalation of militarization, colonization and forcible imposition of Sinhala Buddhist culture in Tamil areas contributed to a finding of genocide by the Permanent People's Tribunal on Sri Lanka, an independent international organization that has examined human rights violations around the world. I must say, because of the help that we obtained from the documents put out by such tribunals, that it was possible for me to prepare all this within the short time that was available. Now we come on to the fourth out of the five limbs of the definition of genocide. Imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. I think our doctors will be aware of what took place during this time. As early as in the 1990s, there have been reported incidents of forced sterilization of the upcountry Tamils. Doctors would promise ₹500 to young and poor Tamil plantation workers who would take a lorry to a makeshift clinic where they were forcibly sterilized via tubal ligation without consent. The government operated this program under the guise of family planning, but its aim was to prevent births among Tamils, thus changing the demographics of the central province. After the implementation of such forced sterilization programs, the growth rate of the Tamil population in the region fell drastically compared to other communities. Trends dating back to 5 to 10 years before these acts of forced sterilization also indicate closures of child care centers following increased forcible sterilization measures, as the number of children below age 5 decreased too much. Women were almost always sterilized before the age of 26 years, which is ostensibly against Sri Lankan law. Thus, while the situation for Tamils deteriorated in the northeast due to the war, the government continued its genocide against Tamils by forcibly sterilizing the upcountry Tamils. In recent times, when you come in, doctors aligned with the Sri Lankan government performed abortions on Tamil women without their consent. In May 2007, a confidential cable from the United States Embassy in Colombo stated, Father Bernard also told us of an EPDP, Elam People's Democratic Party, a pro-government paramilitary organization. Father Bernard also told us of an EPDP medical doctor named Dr. Sinnathambi, who performs forced abortions, often under the guise of a regular checkup on Tamil women suspected of being aligned with the LTTE. Further, in August 2013, government health workers forced mothers to accept surgically implanted birth control in the Tamil villages of Veeravil, Kiranji, Valaipadu in Kilinochi in the northern province. When the women objected, the nurses said that if they did not agree to the contraceptive, they could be denied treatment at the hospital in the future. A Ministry of Health Department report from the Northern Province in 2012 found an unjustifiably higher rate of birth control implants, 30 times higher in Tamil women in Mullaitivu compared to much more densely populated Jaffna. According to the Home for Human Rights, HHR, more than 80% of Tamil women in central Sri Lanka were offered a lump sum payment in return for their ability to reproduce. After receiving this payment, typically 500 rupees, women underwent surgical sterilization. This amount of money is significant, especially for those who are predominantly plantation workers. The population of this Tamil group has dropped annually since 1956 by 5%, whereas the population of the country overall has grown by 14%. In contrast, police and army officers have been encouraged to have a third child through payment of 100,000 rupees from the government. The police and army are overwhelmingly Sinhalese, and thus those taking advantage of this offer are Sinhalese. This systematic pattern of authority-sanctioned coerced sterilizations may amount to an intentional destruction of the Tamil estate population as stated by the Home for Human Rights. And it is also noted about the Sri Lanka's institutionalized impunity, where nobody really cares when they want to be hard on the Tamils. You just carry on being hard on them, nothing will happen to you. That's what the impunity means. This council notes that President Maithripala Sirisena was acting Defense Minister in May 2009 during the peak of the government's attacks against Tamils. This conclusively demonstrates the need for justice and accountability for the Tamil genocide to be driven and carried out by the international community. So that is what is important, because when everybody has some connection to what has taken place, we cannot expect much from an internal institution which goes into these crimes and makes investigations. Tamils have no hope for justice in any Sri Lankan mechanism, whether conducted by the Rajapaksa regime, Sirisena regime, or even its successor. This council further notes that Lieutenant General, I think he has been made general now, I'm not sure, that Lieutenant General Sarath Fonseca was President Rajapaksa's army commander during the later stages of the war and is currently President Sirisena's advisor on defense matters. Fonseca told international media, I strongly believed, I don't know whether he has changed now, at least he appears to be, this is what he said earlier, I strongly believe that this country belongs to the Sinhalese, but there are minority communities and we treat them like our people. We being the majority of the country, 75%, we will never give in and we have the right to protect this country. We are also a strong nation. They can live in this country with us, but they must not try to, under the pretext of being a minority, demand undue things. National Post, 23 September 2008. Fonseca's rhetoric embodies the sentiment of Sinhala nationalist chauvinism that has been a hallmark of Sri Lankan politics since its independence. Sinhala nationalism serves to institutionalize impunity for genocide against Tamils and prevent any meaningful political solution. Further, an internal message from the then United States ambassador in Colombo, Patricia Butenis, said one of the reasons there was such little progress towards a genuine Sri Lankan inquiry into the 2009 killings was that the president and the former army commander, Sarath Fonseca, were largely responsible. There are no examples we know of a regime undertaking wholesale investigations of its own troops or senior officials for war crimes while that regime or government remained in power, Butenis noted. Now this is one of the reasons why we are also against, we are also saying that international investigation is essential and that local institutions cannot come to a proper decision. In Sri Lanka, this is further complicated by the fact that Responsibility for many alleged crimes rests with the country's senior civilian and military leadership, including President Rajapaksa and his brothers and opposition candidate General Fonseca. This is from the WikiLeaks cables. Sri Lankan president responsible for massacre of Tamils, as quoted in The Guardian of 1st of December 2010. Bhutanese analysis that no regime will investigate its own leaders remains equally true under Sirisena's administration, given his role in the military leadership in 2009 and Fonseca's continued position of privilege today. This council further notes that countless presidential commissions established under different regimes to investigate human rights violations have not led to prosecutions of perpetrators or justice. Be they Amnesty International Sri Lanka, 20 years of make-believe Sri Lanka's Commissions of Inquiry, 11th of June 2009. So therefore be resolved that we come to the end of the resolution. Therefore we are now resolving the obligation to prevent and punish genocide under the Genocide Convention is not a matter of political choice or calculation, but one of binding customary international law. This council urges OISL to comprehensively investigate and report on the charge of genocide in its submission to the UN Human Rights Council in March 2015. The UN Security Council should refer the situation in Sri Lanka to the International Criminal Court for prosecutions based on war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide. Alternatively or concurrently, domestic courts in countries that may exercise universal jurisdiction over the alleged events and perpetrators, including but not limited to the United States, should prosecute these crimes. To this day, Tamils in the northeast suffer from Sri Lanka's ongoing genocide. In some areas of the northeast, there is one soldier for every three Tamils. This level of militarization is utterly unjustifiable, given that war ostensibly ended 5 years ago. In Tamil-speaking areas, the Sri Lankan military has exponentially increased its role in Tamils' daily life, expanded the amount of land it controls, and is establishing itself as a permanent occupying presence. There has been no change in the oppressive level of militarization in the northeast with the election of Maithripala Sirisena. The extreme level of militarization uniquely affects Tamil women. There are approximately 90,000 female-headed households in the northeast after the end of the armed conflict. These women are especially vulnerable to sexual violence due to the military's predatory practices. This council urgently calls upon the international community to create conditions suitable and sustainable to protect the Tamils of the northeast provinces in Sri Lanka from genocide. The case of genocide in Sri Lanka is unique among genocides in the history because it occurred over several decades and under different governments before intensifying into a no-holds-barred war for nearly 3 decades and culminating in the mass atrocities of 2009. It is accordingly vital that Sri Lanka's historic violations against Tamils, in addition to the 2009 attacks, are addressed through an international mechanism in order to combat Sri Lanka's institutionalized impunity. This international intervention, coupled with action to promote the respect of human rights, is necessary to ensure a sustainable future for self-determination, peace, justice in Sri Lanka and for the Tamil people. Now, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That brings to an end the long resolution on genocide in Sri Lanka that reflects to some extent the feelings and frustrations of our people, an ancient people with an ancient culture and language. It is my hope that this resolution would not be considered as an epistle to the international community only, unrelated to the life of my Sinhalese brothers and sisters. This resolution is a challenge to your moral integrity and humaneness. If you could assimilate what brutality and inconsiderateness has preceded you or bypassed you so far, maybe chances for moral regeneration and a more healthier, cooperative and coordinated lifestyle for the future of all people living in this blessed isle could be ensured. If only the words of one of our greater civil law advocates, who also happened to be the leader of his people at that time 40 years ago in September 1974, Mr. S.J.B. Chelvanayagam, enshrined in a memorandum from the Tamils of Ceylon to all delegates attending the 20th Commonwealth Conference in Sri Lanka, had been then heeded, at that time, we may have averted the brutal war and its ill effects. He said, in Ceylon today, there is clearly a situation where immediate action and assistance are necessary to stop a bad situation from getting worse. He was appealing to his Commonwealth delegates that they should use their good officers to help in the solution of the problem that had arisen. Today we need to rewrite the wrongs done by all of us. We need to search our conscience. We need to examine ways and means of ushering in a new way of life, a new culture. In this regard, let me quote from an excellent speech made by former Prime Minister of Australia, Mr. Paul Keating, at Redfern Park, Sydney, on 10th of December 1992, on the occasion of the launch of Australia's celebration of 1993 International Year of the World's Indigenous People. As you know, the Australians today who are in power are people who were mostly prisoners who were brought from other areas, and they were able to completely submerge the indigenous people who were there. He said, and I quote, and this is very important, please bear with me just a little more. And as I say, the starting point might be to recognize that the problem starts with us non-Aboriginal Australians. So he's saying that the problems might be really, the blame might be lying not with the Aborigines, but with the non-Aboriginal Australians, and this is what I'm trying to tell the majority community here. It begins, I think, with that act of recognition that it was we who did the dispossessing. We dispossessed them from their land. We took the traditional lands and smashed the traditional way of life. We brought the diseases, the alcohol. We committed the murders. We took the children from their mothers. We practiced discrimination and exclusion. It was our ignorance and our prejudice and our failure to imagine these things being done to us. With some noble exceptions, we failed to make the most basic human response and enter into their hearts and minds. We failed to ask, how would I feel if this was done to me? As a consequence, we failed to see that what we are doing degraded all of us, all the Sri Lankans. I remember the former Chief Justice, Mr. Neville Samarakon, telling me, just coming back after the 1983, during the riots he was in somewhere in the Middle East. He came back and said he had seen various things that were happening in Sri Lanka on the TV, and where the policemen were just staying and looking the other side, people going and burning shops and so on in Peta. He came and said, Vignesh, Sri Lanka is a dirty name in the world today, a dirty word in the world today. So that is what has happened. As a consequence, we fail to see that what we are doing degraded all of us. If we needed a reminder of this, we received it this year. Now this is what the Australian the Prime Minister is saying as to what happened to them, where there had been a report that has come against them. The report of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Deaths in Custody showed with devastating clarity that the past lives on in inequality, racism and injustice. And maybe on the 28th of March, we are expecting a report of similar nature coming in as far as Sri Lankan government is concerned. In the prejudice and ignorance of non-Aboriginal Australians, and in the demoralization and desperation, the fractured identity of so many Aborigines and Torres Strait Islanders. For all this, I do not believe that the report should fill us with guilt. Down the years, there has been no shortage of guilt but it has not produced the responses we need. Guilt is not very constructive emotion. I think what we need to do is open our hearts a bit, all of us. Perhaps when we recognize what we have in common, we will see the things which must be done, the practical things. With these words, dear ladies and gentlemen, or my brothers and sisters, I commit my resolution to this august assembly of men and women who are the pride of my dear people of the Northern Province. Thank you. And may I, sir, ask you that this be forwarded to the relevant OISL office for whatever steps that they may take. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Chief Minister, for the effective, efficient, eloquent